Welcome to the last CERIAS Security seminar for the semester. And my name is Ibrahim Baggili, and I'm going to be your presenter for today. Today you're going to hear a topic that is a little more social scientifically oriented when compared to the other topics that you hear in this class. I'm going to be talking about anonymity and how anonymity should be extended to high-tech white-collar crime and the IT insider threat. So just by a show of hands, who's ever done anything and they wanted to be anonymous while they were doing it? Come on. Yeah, some of you are not paying attention, or they're not really being honest here, right? Who's ever driven in an area where they knew there were no cops so that they don't, yeah. So we all do these things, and it's just part of being human. So the purpose of this presentation is the following, okay? I want to motivate students in the science, technology, engineering, and mathematics fields to engage themselves in more social, scientific-oriented work. Okay, my background, by the way, is in telecommunications and networking technology and in programming. But then I took on this extra effort to try to understand all this social science stuff. And also to inspire you to pursue some research in that area. And finally, I want to illustrate the importance of research in that area. So to do that, let's have a look at this. These are going to be the topics that I'm going to discuss. I'm going to discuss why should we talk about humans, why should we talk about psychology. I'm going to discuss some background info on anonymity and anonymity in computer-mediated communications. I'm going to talk about cybercrime, but in specific, I'm going to limit my discussion to white-collar crime or high-tech white-collar crime and the IT insider threat. And then we're going to move on to see what can we do with this info and some conclusions. So why social science? Who invented the computer? Was it humans or aliens? Humans. Can a computer exist by itself? Deepak, can a computer exist by itself? No. Someone needs to operate the computer, right? Who performs the attack? The computer? How can it be the computer? Who wrote that malicious code that's going to run on that computer to perform the attack by itself? Even if it's artificial intelligence. It's a human at the end of the day. Right? So there's too much research on this technical side. Okay, we all do research on authentication, authorization, encryption, decryption, but are we really looking at this stuff? That's a good question to ask. So anonymity. Let's go back to the Greek world, right? Anonymity is actually anonymous, and those are the Greek letters. They look kind of cool. And it's the state of being well, actually, anonymity is not having a name. That's the original meaning of anonymity. Is if something doesn't have a name, then it's anonymous. And then the definition started changing. So that's another definition there. With the rise of computing, this whole concept of pseudonymity came along, which means that you're using a false name. For example, if you're chatting online but not using your real name, then that's pseudonymity. And with the rise of the internet, 4 types of anonymity and pseudonymity came about. Traceable and untraceable. That simply means that if it's traceable, I can trace it back to the sender. Okay? And in pseudonymity terms, I can trace back your fake name. Okay? So if your fake name is Rogers, okay, or if your fake name is Justin, I can trace back that message to Justin. Untraceable means that you can't trace it back to the origin, whether it's pseudonymity or anonymity. So we just looked at 2 ways, actually 3 different definitions of anonymity, right? We looked at without a name, we looked at Frumkin's definition, and here's another model that was proposed as well. Another model is looking at anonymity in layers, going from visual anonymity to disassociation of identity, which means that I'm not giving you my true identity, to the lack of identification, which is very similar to what? Untraceable, right? That means I can't trace who you are. So what? I just presented you, I gave you a quick overview of different definitions of anonymity, and I gave you different models. So we have different definitions, right? We have different models. Come in. And it's starting to become highly associated with what? Computing, right? Above all that, with all that said, it's also associated with culture. Research is indicating that based on your culture, your perception of anonymity is different. All right? Westerners are more likely to gravitate towards concepts with lower levels of anonymity. Easterners seek online activities with higher levels of anonymity. What does that mean? Who can tell me why that exists? Who can see the reasoning behind that? Can anyone tell me? Yes? Yes, in a global sense. Not like East and West Indiana. I'm looking at the global sense. Well, no, I'm looking at the in global sense. That's a good question. So who can tell me why that's the case? Yes?
Well, in China, there have been people persecuted for some of their beliefs and expressions of speech.
Possibly, but the reasoning behind this actual research was something different. What's the major difference between an Eastern culture and a Western culture? One is individualistic, the other one is, which means what? They work in groups. They work in groups, right? I'm from the Middle East, we work in groups. That actually influences your perception of anonymity. Okay? Because if you don't want to show that you're part of a certain group, then what are you going to do? Or if you want to show that you're part of a group, then you're more willing to convey that information, right? So now we move on. We talked about anonymity. We talked about there's different definitions, so there are problems with the definitions. Now we're going to move on to how anonymity affects behavior. Now, Gustave Le Bon is actually a French writer, and he published this work in 1895 in a book called The Crowd, a study of the popular mind. And he was one of the first people to say that if you are submerged in a group, you're going to feel that you're more anonymous. How does that work? Who's ever been to a concert with a lot of people? Okay? Did you feel anonymous there, that you didn't know anyone? You're just seeing all these people, and you might do something crazy, right? Gustave Le Bon stated that. And that is called a deindividuation state. Okay? When you are deindividuated, that means what? That means you lose your sense of individuality. Now, Gustave Le Bon had something called the crowd theory. Festinger in 1952 explained it differently. He says that if you're submerged into a group, you lose your individuality because you're being part of a group. But the reason why you act differently is because it decreases your internal individual restraints of moral controls. What does that mean? That personally, I have what? I have restraints inside of me. Okay? Any person has restraints. And if you're in a group, these restraints are going to be decreased. Therefore, I'm going to act a different way than I would normally act. So now we've seen two theories on deindividuation. Right? Here's another one. Here's a big one. Zimbardo. Okay? Zimbardo's theory is more objective. His studies, and actually the interesting thing about Zimbardo is now we're talking about cybercrime. This whole thing is going to lead to cybercrime. Zimbardo focused on behaviors called deindividuated behaviors. He basically stated that if you are deindividuated,